In the previous model, we discussed interviewing skills and the process of gathering information from human sources. This week, we move on with techniques in handling materials once field reporting has been completed. More specifically, we focused on the use of different types of quotations, best practices in quoting human sources, and making attribution. Input from human sources makes the story vivid and interesting. Quotations add color and credibility. They help put a human voice to a news report. By including compelling statements from various sources, we can add balance to our reporting. However, not everything we gather from human sources is worth quoting. Use quotation for reaction and interpretation. If someone has something unique to say, that may be a good quote. If someone says something that is not new but says it in a unique manner, we can use the quote. We have discussed the value of prominence, so if someone's important says something important, we should include that statement in the story. Witness accounts are important because they add authenticity to our reporting. Finally, good quotes are used in the right place and at the right time. They help move the story forward. Generally, there are two major types of quotations, direct quotes and indirect quotes. Direct quotations use the exact words of a speaker. We use quotation marks and attribution in a direct quote. There are two subcategories of direct quotations. Complete direct quotes use the entire statement of the speaker. Partial direct quotes use only a few words from the statement. Indirect quotes paraphrase words to communicate the speaker's meaning. We don't use quotation marks in paraphrase quotes, but we do make attribution. Basically, use all types of quotation as spices, not as the key ingredients. It's a good idea to mix direct and indirect quotations to make the story flow smoothly. Only use direct full quotes or partial quotes when they are better than being paraphrased. Don't stack up long direct quotes together. Set up situations before using quotation and make sure that each quote is compelling. Here are some practical tips for you to consider when using quotations. First, don't make up or distort quotations. Direct quotes should be in the speaker's own words. Don't quote if you don't understand what the person says. If you are in doubt about the authenticity of a statement, leave it out, or at least point out the errors. If there is a controversy, you need to quote both sides to ensure balance. Don't use direct quotes in news releases because they are self-serving. Try to get your own quotes as much as possible. If you have to use a direct quotation that you don't personally get from a source, always indicate the source of the quote. If you interview a source in a phone interview or via email, put it down. A direct quotation is used as is. There are situations when you have to consider correcting grammar, accent, or deleting obscenity. Please follow the guideline in the AP Style book. I have assigned an entry for you to review. In order to avoid redundancies and ambiguities, you can remove the redundant parts of a statement and use ellipses to indicate that some of the words of the quote are missing. You can mix-match questions and answers so that sentences logically go together. But you have to make sure the decision doesn't distort or change the meaning of what the speaker intended. Don't combine complete direct and partial quotation in a statement. Often quotes are single words that are used with quotation marks to emphasize. Avoid using them. Don't switch person in a partial quote. Make sure to have an agreement in the use of pronouns and possessive adjectives. When you use direct quotations, make sure to have punctuation inside the quotation marks. Quotations within a direct quotation are set off with single quotation marks. In a few cases where you have long quotes for several paragraphs, the quotation marks are closed at the final paragraph. Each new paragraph should open with quotation marks. When you interview sources, it is important to emphasize that you gather information that is on the record and for publication. Meanwhile, there are cases where the source doesn't want to be identified. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, the source could say, by the way, the information is off the record. You should stop right away and ask what the source means by off the record. You need to know about different types of information to make a decision. On the record information is the one you could quote and attribute to the source. Off the record means that you could not use the information. Not for attribution indicates that you may use the information but cannot make attribution to its source. Background means you may use the information with a general title for a source. Deep background information is the one you may use but you cannot indicate the source. If a source asks for anonymity, you should first negotiate and don't be easy in granting anonymity. You will be surprised how often people flip-flop on this request. If the source insists, you may politely refuse or clarify your terms in using the information. Try your best to change the person's mind without losing the source. Consider anonymous sources as a high-risk investment. Information in your story should be attributed with full name, title, and credentials. Anonymity should always be the last resort. If you used anonymous sources, make sure that your editor knows the identity of the source and use the following checklist for making a decision. Don't use anonymous sources if the information is not vital to the story and you may have other on-the-record sources. Make sure that the source could not use anonymity for personal or partisan attack. The information should be completely factual. You won't use anonymous sources if they are credible. You have to ask whether the sources have a legitimate reason to have their identity withheld. From time to time, when you are report on crimes, you may need to change the name or withhold the identity of the victims to protect their privacy. Information gathered from field reporting, particularly quotation from human and other sources, should be attributed. But you don't need to quote yourself as a source if you witness the event, or if the information belongs to public record. It is generally known and contains no opinions or controversies. Attribution is the identification of the source in the quotation, either direct or paraphrased. Attribution lends credibility to the story and allows the audience to evaluate the credibility of the information. Even if you used anonymous sources, you must attribute and then include the reason for anonymous attribution. Here is the guideline for making attribution. First, use neutral and non-obtrusive wording when you attribute. When you quote a human source, use attribution verbs such as say, tell, add, ask in most cases. If you quote a written text, report, or document, use according to or report. Verbs such as argue, declare, claim, have connotations. Avoid using them. In most cases, attribution should be placed at the end of the first sentence of the quote. The attribution comes at the beginning of the quote only if the speaker is newsworthy or you switch speakers in two consecutive quotes. Use attribution in the middle of a sentence only if it is a compound sentence. In terms of punctuation, the example provided on page 101 of the text is self-explanatory, and please review it carefully. When making attribution, it is best to use the past tense. In broadcast writing, photo captions, and feature stories, you can use the present tense. But in hard news stories, please use the past tense. In most cases, you will use the subject-verb structure when attributing to the source. There is an exception when you use a clause to describe the speaker. That clause can be the title or credentials. Avoid putting the title between the speaker's name and the attribution verb.